thanks everyone for joining us today. I was talking to Connor earlier. I know a freight on a day after a holiday like yesterday can be fairly chaotic. So, I promise we'll deliver on today's topic. And that actually is growth hacks to building a top-notch brokerage. So just a few housekeeping things before we kick off here. I would encourage you to share any questions or comments or even experiences you've had regarding today's topic. So please enter those in the chat and feel free to type in your thoughts there. We do have a Q&A section at the end to get to those. So if we get time, we'll have an open Q&A for you. We'll also be recording this session and we'll send that out along with our kind of ultimate checklist on building that top-notch brokerage, including a few key questions to engage carriers through your procurement process. At the end of the webinar, there's probably going to be a brief survey as you exit, just to let us know how we did and a place for you to add, again, any further comments or add any topics that you'd like for us to do in the future. So with that being said, I'm the jolly fellow there on the left. I'm Chris Arredondo, co-founder and VP of pretty much everything customer related here at Cargo Chief. There's probably not a hat that I haven't worn except for engineering. I have no business building code, so leave that to our CTO. A little bit more about me. I started my career at C.H. Robinson, did a little bit of carrier rep stuff there, moved on to XPO, did sales and leadership and things like that over there, had a couple big accounts, went on to a couple other brokerages and eventually kind of around Hurricane Harvey or so, I'm out of Houston. So there was a big gap in capacity right around Harvey and right around there's some mandate, I think the ELD mandate at that time in 2018 or 2017, that really shed light to a lot of issues that I started seeing in the industry that were still very apparent. And knowing that like a lot of the TMSs were stuck in the 80s, I came over here with Cargo Chief with my two other co-founders, and we built out the tool of what we use today. And that's, really a software that helps brokers pre-book more freight, expand their carrier base, and automate some of those redundant tasks in that procurement process, which like a lot of times through the year, there's a ton of disruption, and anything you can do to automate some of those things will help. And kind of the four pillars of our company and our platform that we have is really capacity, procurement, pricing, bringing it all together with automation. So I'm going to kind of introduce Connor here, who I have with me. Connor, I'm going to pass this off to you. So tell us a little bit more about you, yourself, your path, your journey, where you are today, and kind of the growth of ArdentX and how you and I got connected.
So I'm pretty much in the same boat as you, Chris. There's probably not a hat that I haven't worn, even including trying IT things. Definitely not an expert by any means at most things, but I've definitely got my foot in the door of pretty much everything that you can think of in freight. So like you said, my name's Connor Miller. I'm one of the co-founders here at ArdentX. We're actually an asset-based 3PL. We were founded in 2018, and we were founded as really a small business with big values. Really, our main mission has always been to change the industry standards. We pride ourselves on being transparent, leading with values as guiding principles. Our goal has always been to engage, connect, and build mutually beneficial relationships with shippers and carriers. Definitely not the smartest guy in the room by far. I have an amazing team that's pretty much driven all the growth that we've had over the past 4 years. And really, one of the main reasons we've been able to grow to the level we have been able to grow to is taking care of the people that work here. And by leading with values. We have 10 principles that I run the company on that we never deviate from. And those principles are as follows. 1, we are customer obsessed. 2, we communicate effectively. 3, we own the day and every decision made throughout. 4, we're always learning. 5, we ask questions. 6, we take the best ideas and leave ego at the door. 7, we do the right thing. 8, we are empathetic. 9, we value feedback. And 10, we build trust through transparency, no bullshit. Living by these has really driven us further than we could have imagined in the beginning. And I'm sure we'll go deeper and deeper into some of those topics as the webinar goes on.
That last principle there, love it. And for those of you, I don't know if a lot of you follow Connor on LinkedIn or some of the other platforms, but he puts out a lot of good content. I think that's really valuable and kind of missed throughout the day. I think just being a broker and a lot of motivating things out there. So at the end, I'd encourage you guys to kind of follow Connor there on LinkedIn. So good stuff that he puts out. So kind of before we get into things, I'd like to see kind of what the biggest challenges most of you are facing today when it comes to growth. There are a few answers here. It should cover mostly everything. So I'm going to try to, it's my first time triggering this poll here. So let's see if I can do this correctly. There we go. You should see something pop up asking a question, what's the biggest challenge you face today? Kind of just going to read them out here for those of you just listening in. One is being that your carrier base is limited. Two, maybe it's a talent issue. Three, maybe it's just tough to scale in general. Then the other one there is maybe technology might come into play. Or the last one there, maybe your business is relying heavily on those single transactions rather than a pre-booking or long-term strategy. So hopefully that covers everything. I wanted to try to not put an other option. So we'll kind of
there'd be way too many others.
Yeah. I always see we use HubSpot as our CRM, and one of the things I learned is when you're putting a handoff form in place for sales guys, if there's an other option, they're always going to click it because it's faster. Close the deal quicker. Let's go. So try to stay away from those other options. So looks like we got about half results so far. Give it a little bit more, maybe get to 3/4 of you guys. Looks like getting in some mixed results here. It's interesting to see.
Definitely pretty interesting.
Yeah. Can you see that on your end? I'm curious.
I can, yeah.
I'm about to share it here shortly with everybody.
I was expecting a lot more of the second option, honestly.
It is almost a dead heat race, like all tie, 3-way tie. Let's see if there's one tiebreaker. Yeah, one more vote. I wish I could vote. I can't vote though. One more person. There we go. All right. I think we got one leader here. All right. So I went ahead and ended it. We got about 77% of you guys. I'm going to click the share results button. Everyone should be able to see that. I'll drag it over just in case can't. So it looks like the winner was our carrier base is limited. It's one of the biggest challenges that a lot of brokers are facing today. Next up was looks like you want to scale but don't quite know how, and then focusing too much on I guess single loads and those one-offs. But back to the carrier base, and I think what we'll get into here definitely towards the end and throughout the presentation here is that carrier base is kind of your lifeline. Like when you talk to carriers, especially when you get those deep relationships with carriers, it's really a relationship based partnership, right? Like they treat you as a customer and they kind of want that same thing reciprocated back. And when you do treat them as customers and as people, it goes a long way, and expanding out just from your core carrier group it's tough to do. There's not a lot of tools out there that allows you to do that quickly and efficiently the right way. So I'm gonna click the stop sharing button. So just kind of related to that poll there, I guess, Connor, I'm going to kind of ask you this. What are some challenges that you guys faced there early on when ArdentX was just starting out, or hell, I don't know, even today?
So definitely those two that had the most votes, those were two of our big challenges too. Narrow carrier base, and then really the scaling it's actually a lot easier than people make it out to be. We tend to overcomplicate things, and that's been one of the issues that we had as well, and myself included. I mean, I've overcomplicated so many different decisions and then not implemented anything, right? The problem with a lot of people when they're trying to scale is they're afraid to make a mistake, and it's going to be inevitable, right? Like you're going to implement things that don't work. And you're just going to have to make adjustments based off of the changes that you're making. For us, though, really part of the biggest problem in the brokerage world is everyone wants to grow so quickly. Everybody wants to have everything figured out tomorrow. And unless you've already built a brokerage, this is probably the wrong approach for you. There's so many different variables that come with building a business. And one of the main ones people lose sight of is internal culture. That's something that we struggled at for a long time. We always wanted to grow the business and then get the culture right. And we were doing it backwards for a really long time. So when we decided to kind of flip that, everything started to change. So we've been really intentional about building that culture, making sure our company is a great place for people to work. That's huge. Our compensation structure is one of the best in the city that we're based in. We provide so many different opportunities for employees to grow. And there's actually an old quote that I like to reference a lot that says, if you take care of your employees, they'll take care of your customers. And we've really found that to be really true in our business. Most companies focus on culture later, and this makes it harder to grow, in my opinion, because if your employees don't like working at your company, they're not going to be motivated to work. Another thing that we had challenges with too was overpromising and under-delivering. There's so many brokerages out there that are telling all the shippers that they can move all their freight. If you overpromise and underdeliver, you're literally starting the relationship behind the 8-ball. And that's something that we were really guilty of at first. So I would encourage everybody to really be realistic. Don't commit to things that you can't deliver. Every other broker is already doing that. Every other broker is already out there telling all the shippers that they can move all their freight. So why would you? You really have to find out what your model is going to be and what customers actually need. And then kind of go in with a plan, right? Like you don't even know if you can help that shipper until you can understand what they're actually struggling with. And when you do go in with your shippers, don't use your current customers as your case study. I mean, they don't care about how many Fortune 100 shippers you already work with. They don't care about how good of a brokerage you have. They care about if you can actually understand their needs and provide solutions. Commitment to decisions, that one's been a lot, and that kind of goes with the bad morals thing. In the brokerage world, it's always kind of been the brokers against the carriers. And, there's this common thought that brokers are dirty and they'll always pay cheaper carriers and take carriers off the load if they find a cheaper truck and so on and so forth. And that's pretty much been how it's been since I've been in the industry. I mean, it's been what I hear on a daily basis. And we kind of were guilty at that at the beginning too. When you're starting all this out and you're seeing what most of the other brokers are doing and you try to follow that, I mean, most of the time you're setting yourself up to fail because a lot of these brokerages are running their businesses with bad morals. So commitment to decisions has been a huge contributor for our growth. One of the core principles is we own the day and every decision made throughout. And I said that earlier. We've never given back freight ever, no matter what. If we've committed to it, we've ran it. There's even been times, and I don't know if I should even say it, but during holidays where it's been crazy. I mean, we've lost tens of thousands of dollars in a day because we've committed on the freight that we have for those holidays. And of course, you balance that out with spot market and things of that nature. But most other carriers go MIA during those. Most other brokers go MIA. And what happens with your shippers? They have to spot all that freight out to other brokers and increase their spend dramatically. So that's been really big for us, building those partnerships with the shippers we work with. And really, honestly, most companies don't have a well-run RFP process, right? Like most of these companies go in and they submit the rates on their RFPs thinking that it's going to work out no matter what. And they don't plan for seasons and changes and market capacity tightening in certain regions because of weather and things of that nature. So really, we've seen so many companies that we've actually kind of gained business through them failing. So I would say really be aware of what's going on with your shippers and the type of problems they're having, because you can be the guy that kind of swoops in and saves the day. So RFP process, one of the reasons why our customers have really loved working with us is, like I said, it's been a partnership. It hasn't been transactional business. Most of the shippers that we've worked with, we've started really small and just grown over time. For instance, one of our bigger enterprise accounts, we're doing around 30 million a year with them now. When we started out, the first year we did 200,000 in revenue. So, I mean, it's insane the kind of growth that you can get with your existing clients. I think too many brokers are going out there and trying to get as many customers as they can possibly get, instead of focusing on building those partnerships with the current clients that they have and figuring out how much deeper they can go into the needs of those shippers. Another thing is the narrow carrier base. Relationship brokering is huge, man. I mean, it will never, ever, ever change. No matter what happens in the industry, no matter what kind of technology evolves, no matter what kind of new processes get implemented, the relationship part will never change. It's always going to be the best way to do business, no matter what. Most brokers today have turned into what I like to call receptionist brokers. All they do is post the freight out onto the load boards, sit back and wait for the phone to ring. And guess what? It doesn't work. That's why you're struggling with the narrow carrier base, because you're not being intentional about building it up. You're just posting the freight and waiting for somebody to call. It's probably the worst possible way to be a broker, really. I mean, I got guys out here pounding the phone, calling backhaul lists, compiling data into our CRM for carrier management, and building relationships with carriers based off of their needs and based off of the current shippers that we have, right? One of the things that I see so much is the brokers not understanding that we need carriers, man. It's not a broker against carrier thing. It's a partnership. You should be treating those carriers the same way you treat your customers. And I don't see that happen often on the brokerage side. I mean, really, all of these things and staying ahead, like that's one thing that I see all the time is brokers are always trying to play catch up, right? Like most brokerages are on a hamster wheel every single day, just doing day to day, day to day, day to day, and they can never get ahead because of that. So working ahead has been something that's been huge for us as well. And then attracting new customers. I mean, it's hard to do that in our business when there's so many different competitors out there. So you really have to differentiate yourself, and it's going to be based off the type of model you want, right? Like our model has always been service, service, service. And I mean, everybody says that, right? Like everybody out there is like, oh yeah, we're service first. And what happens when the RFP actually goes live, right? So, I mean, we actually say service, 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 and then our shippers say, wow, these guys actually deliver on the things that they say. So that's huge. And really, I mean, we've kind of always gone that route of the building the relationships and partners with shippers and carriers. Really doing all of those things is really what helped us grow how we have. And that put us at, I think we did 139.5 million last year.
Wow.
750% growth since 2017.
It's incredible. It's that 80-20 rule, I guess. You know, 80% of your day should be spent pre-booking and working on future, getting ahead, not playing catch up, and that other 20% kind of letting the day take care of itself. You mentioned something earlier about like it's about your shipper. Here, you know, here on the software side, like we do product demos, and like I emphasize a lot with our sales team that it's all about the discovery. If we don't even get to the product, that's okay. Like as long as we have found exactly what the problems and solutions are that customer is looking for, the product will sell itself. It's shouldn't be about features. And same for a broker, right? It should be about fit. Like what are you going to do differently from the next broker next door, right? Like what makes it fit in your wheelhouse, and why should you guys work together? Gonna kind of move on to that. It's kind of a perfect segue here, kind of getting into the agenda, I guess. We'll, really wanted to set the stage and really express some of the mistakes that we've seen, what we've heard. I mean, here at Cargo Chief, we talk to several brokers, probably 20, 30 a week. So we're really into kind of like the different stages where brokers are. And I guess, here talking about the 4 components to growth. 1 that we'll cover is driving consistency through training. 2, talk a little bit about recurring revenue and finding your niche. 3, again, really emphasizing that carrier base and carrier expansion. And then 4, kind of tying everything together with scalability through innovation. And we'll talk a little bit about some tools and talent processes and hiring and things of that nature. So here, I kind of want to ask another question here into the first topic, covering that training and consistency. And what's the most important aspect to your training program? So I'm going to cue this poll up. I think I did it successfully last time, so hopefully this works again. So you should see a question coming up. What's the most important aspect of your training program? The list of the answers are here. Is it ramp time? Is that like, are you really trying to get them ramped up quickly? Is it getting them to be able to understand that technology that you guys have? Is it teaching them how to negotiate with carriers or shippers or customers? Is it just industry knowledge, the terms and terminology, or learning a specific sales process? And with that sales process, kind of more on, it could be either customer side or carrier rep side, but really understanding the whole process. So we got about half replies already. Going to see if we have any tiebreakers here. This time looks like there's one that's kind of leading the pack here. It's kind of like a horse race or something. I don't watch horses race, but I feel
I can
like
imagine that it would be like this. Yes.
yeah. Give a little bit more time. Come on, two, three more, and then we'll share these results here. All right, looks like it's filling up pretty well. One more. Let's see if we can get one more here. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and end the poll. I got about a third here. So I'm gonna click share results. Just in case you can't see it, I'll drag it over. So it looks like one of the most important pieces is technology. Surprising. I think I would have expected something like ramp time. I feel like a lot of companies try to push people out of the on-the-job training quicker so they can just kind of get in faster. But this, it's interesting to see this because looking ahead, like I would say that some tools out there aren't necessarily a hindrance, but they kind of support your training and training process, I would say. And that's really cool to see. It's enlightening, I would say, at least from a product standpoint.
I thought this would be different too. I was expecting a different result by far.
Yeah. And so if you did answer this as use of technology, I'd be really curious to see, any questions you have or comments or experiences, why this was a good answer. Because that's really, really cool to see, I would say. So I'm gonna kind of move on from this guy here. Let's actually get into this. So Connor, I'm going to kind of lean on you a little bit more again here. Walk us through what you guys do there at ArdentX when it comes to that onboarding and training. I know we talked earlier, and it seems like a very unique experience, I would say. Something I wish I could have had starting my career out at C.H. Robinson, and really curious to hear what you guys do there differently.
Sure. I mean, my biggest thing has always been, and I always tell all the employees here, is there is two different ways to teach a kid how to swim. And what I mean by that is, one way you can show a kid videos, you can read him books and show PowerPoints on swimming. The other way is you can throw him in the pool and jump in with him. That's the way that we try to approach things here at ArdentX. So most companies, they'll probably put you through a general week-long of training, sitting, looking at PowerPoints, many cases in a classroom type setting. But in my opinion, most of the time, it's not the best way to learn. It's like being in a classroom, and a lot of people were not great at school, myself included. I got like D's and F's in school. I was a terrible student. So we don't really want to recreate that process if it's something that's already not working, especially in the classroom. When it comes to training, we take a more hands-on approach. Before our new hires start in their exact role, they actually sit and train in each department to learn what other departments' jobs consist of. So for instance, if I'm bringing in a carrier sales rep, I'm going to have that guy sit with our track and trace department and learn their job. I'm going to have him sit with our customer operations department and learn their job, because it's really important for them to understand how the decisions they make may affect the other sides of the business. So that's why I was kind of surprised that the leading one wasn't industry knowledge and like terminology and stuff like that. Because my opinion on that is, you can't be an effective carrier sales rep, broker, whatever, unless you actually know what's going on, right? So after the first week of training with each department, they should have kind of a high level overview of the business. That's when we turn into what we actually call teachable moment training. This is when we have the person actually working, making calls and completing tasks while either a senior team member shadows them or their manager shadows them. It's very hard to help someone if you don't know what they need help with. And most of the time in a fast moving business like this, it's really hard to narrow in on those topics that a person could really, really use help on. So we find this teachable in the moment training to work far better than like a classroom setting. So through the process, it helps us really identify things that an individual needs help with, like I said, and correct anything before it becomes a bad habit. In our industry, it's really easy to build those bad habits. So hitting it head on before it turns into a bad habit is crucial, in my opinion. We may even do some role play as part of that process too. So the phone software that we use, it enables us to basically listen in on calls. Myself and some of the ops managers likely will do what we like to call dummy calls, where it's us on the other end of the line posing as a carrier, things of that nature. And for us, I mean, we've been doing this, I've been doing this my whole 20s, right? So I know exactly what's going on in the industry. I've done every single part. So that role play actually helps out tremendously. And I mean, when we first started doing that, most people were like, oh, well, this is crazy. You know, this is so weird. And like some people like make fun of the whole role play thing. It's like, okay, well, I mean, you can make fun of it all you want while we role play over here and get better, you know?
Yeah.
And really, in terms of ramp time, we usually have new hires up and running, working in their role within the first 2 weeks. I do see that a lot of people kind of like to do the quick ramp time. But I mean, you don't want to throw the kid in the pool if you're not swimming with him, right? You can't just give the guy a week long of training and then throw him in the fire and expect him to produce results. It doesn't work like that, right? So, and the great thing really about that is about the culture we have is we've created one of a communication and accountability on all fronts, right? We win and lose as a team, so there's never any throwing anyone under the bus. If someone is making mistakes, we hit it head on and figure out how to use it as learning experiences to improve the person's workflow. And our managers are very invested in the people we bring on to their teams. The problem I see at most businesses, especially in our industry, is the managers think that the people work for them. And in our opinion, it's opposite. Our managers work for our people.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, towards the end of this, we're going to be talking a little bit about leadership and self-reflection points, which that is absolutely true. I thought it was, I'm not sure if you mentioned it earlier, but you know, in that track and trace, that first 2 weeks, like, you know, my time at C.H. Robinson, it was like very hands-on. And if I had known what mistakes to not make on the broker side when I'm booking freight, like knowing to not tell that driver 4 p.m., be honest with him, tell him that it is 4 a.m. and it might take a little bit to time to get unloaded. If I knew that stuff like in the beginning, it would have helped me kind of adapt and understand a little bit better on that like decision when I'm booking freight versus like what happens next if I do the wrong thing.
Well, yeah. And like most companies from what I've seen through my industry experience is they're having a problem solving mindset. We don't have a problem solving mindset. We have a problem prevention mindset. We don't ever want those things to become a problem. So we do everything we can at the beginning to ensure that the person doesn't ever create those problems.
Yeah, because we all know we don't want those problems. Your load might end up in the water or at least threatened to.
It's happened to me before. I mean, honestly, man, like when I first started in the industry, I was the worst culprit of being an asshole as a broker. I mean, I was the guy that wouldn't pay the carrier's detention. I was the guy that, you know, if I owed a guy a layover, I wouldn't answer the phone because that's what most brokers do, you know, and you see that. I mean, there's literally meme pages on social media about shitty brokers. So if you really want to grow your company and you really want to differentiate yourself from the crowd, you have to go polar opposite of that.
Yeah.
And I mean, you'll just feel better as a broker, as somebody running a business, you'll be able to sleep at night. I mean, there's no way that you can sleep with a clear mind if you're out here screwing people over.
Or with your phone ringing at 1 a.m. because you messed up.
Exactly.
Big thing in my days. You know, back to the answer and the biggest response of technology. You know, as I thought about it a little bit more, my time at XPO, it was, you know, they flew us all to Chicago regardless. Like if you were experienced or not, like you went to learn the technology that they had, which, you know, kind of makes sense, I guess, with a bigger company. And as companies evolve and as more tools are out there that, some smaller companies can get their hands on affordably, they don't have to have that $6 million spend in tech, then it kind of makes a little bit of sense to, adapt that technology and see if there are ways that you can use it to help ramp your team and help your culture and behavior, and just kind of boost and solidify some things there.
I agree to a certain extent on that, but what I would say is to caution people to not become too invested on their technology running their business, right? In my opinion, you can never get rid of the human connection and what it means for relationships in our industry. What I see most people do is try to innovate through technology, and they're trying to erase some of that human connection. And through that process, they're losing some of the relationships that they could have been building. So I would say don't rely on technology to run your business. It is a great tool to have in your kit, but I think technology comes secondary to the relationship part.
Yeah, like I typically say is this industry still favors that phone call and conversation over any sort of technology. So, kind of moving here into the revenue side of things, I think, we can talk more about training. And again, if any of you'd like to connect after this webinar, certainly would be happy to kind of go in a little deeper on each section, even at that. So moving into like the revenue side of things, I'd like to know if you guys kind of have like a revenue model in place. If you haven't quite analyzed recurring revenue yet, that's okay, or haven't put a strategy around that. I'm just really, want to shed some light to this thing, because from a software standpoint, it's really important, at least how we operate, to have that recurring revenue. So I'm going to launch this poll again, becoming a pro at this now. Should start charging people to host their webinar. It's only three answers on this one, so hopefully we get some quick ones, quick wins. It might be a new term, but I think, when we actually start talking about it, you may be surprised at, do you actually have recurring revenue? Give a little bit more time here.
You guys are in the best business by far for recurring revenue.
That's right. I'm excited to talk about this section. It's so it's something we always have to look at. And it's interesting coming from a brokerage that I never even really thought deeply about this until now I'm talking about it. So give one or two more answers. See if we can break some of these close ties here. All right, I'm going to go ahead and end the poll. Share the results here. I'd say this is kind of what I was expecting. I probably anticipate a little bit more people to say no. Now, I guess that was the leader, so it's at least there is that. But I think, when we start talking about recurring revenue, you may actually think back and go to your team and say like, hey, we actually do have recurring revenue. How do we start getting this on the books and have more visibility to this? So kind of into there. I don't know, Connor, do you have any insight into recurring revenue?
Well, what I've seen work great for us has been, I think I mentioned earlier, finding areas where other companies have failed, taking that over and succeeding at that. We've seen most of those situations turn into a recurring revenue opportunity. So, I mean, it's not like we're sitting out here betting on other companies failing or anything. I mean, that's not what we want to do by any means, but it does happen, right? So having the awareness of that going on with your shippers and talking about those pain points often, instead of just getting on a call once a year for the RFP and things like that. There's a lot of maintenance involved in the sales process with outside customers. It's not just, you get your awards for your annual bid and then you don't talk to those guys for 6 months. It's not how it works if you want recurring revenue. For us too, I mean, really our goal has always been, we try to start small. We don't want to go in with a shipper and start moving a ton of freight with those guys the first year. And I think I mentioned earlier, one of our bigger enterprise accounts that we do around 30 million a year with, we started out first year, we did 200,000 in revenue. So we start small. We don't want all the freight up front. We play the long game, really. I mean, we want to prove ourselves up front and grow together as a partnership should. We have heavy capacity on the weekends, which has been huge for us. We really just built out staff around that rather than having our people working overtime all the time. We've built out staff around different swing shifts to ensure ample weekend coverage. I've noticed this year on a lot of RFPs going out, there's a section that actually says, do you have weekend coverage? And that's something new to me that I haven't really seen over the past few years. So I think that's interesting. And that's something that we've been building for the last 18 months is the weekend coverage side of the business. And then it really means for the weekend stuff too, there's so many expedited shipments that happen on the weekends, right? Because other companies fail. So we always are ready for those kind of things. We have a lot of expedited stuff in our recurring revenue. Another thing that kind of differentiates us as a brokerage is we're an asset-based 3PL. So we actually have a lot of our own equipment as well. We have about 150 trailers that we own that we actually partner with carriers. We drop some of our trailers at facilities. Carrier will drop some of their trailers at a facility. And that kind of stuff always turns into recurring revenue so long as you're servicing that lane in the way that the customer expects you to service it. So when I say that, I mean, it's like, we have skin in the game with the carrier, right? Like we're not just a broker that's looking to just broker your freight out to all these carriers. Like we're trying to provide different level of value instead of just being a broker. So skin in the game, I'm trying to think of anything else. Oh, I mean, most of all, really, I mean, we over communicate, man. Like there's times where we start with a shipper that we've never worked with. And on Monday morning, he's like, all right, I need you guys to stop sending so many communication emails. Like, I'm not even used to this. And we found that to be super effective in having those clients come back and turn into repeat customers that we work with for years. And like I said earlier, man, I mean, in a game full of technology, nothing ever beats that human connection. Nothing ever beats you getting on the phone with the planner that you work with for the Midwest, asking her about her day, what's going on, what kind of problems can I fix for you? Nothing is ever going to beat that. There's no I mean, you can get an automated email on a drip campaign, but what is that going to do for the person? They're probably just going to click on it and go to the next email. They're probably not even going to read it.
Yeah. It's, I think for us, and you mentioned you guys are in a unique position, us being a software company, right? So like a recurring revenue model from a business or a software standpoint typically means there's an exchange of services for a monthly subscription or at some interval yearly by month, a lot of tools out there. And for those of you who are customers who are here today, you guys are familiar with that monthly recurring revenue model, or we call it MRR, I guess. We look at subscriptions. I think when it comes to brokerage, there aren't really subscriptions or memberships, but kind of what Connor was saying, you can set yourself up with a model that mirrors that, right? Setting yourself up and putting yourself in front of the customer, knowing that you're going to be there for that weekend coverage, guaranteeing you freight for weekend freight, or locking in that extra revenue that maybe you didn't have before. And I think, if you're talking to your shippers about their regular lanes, how often they run them, how many you can commit to, how many they're willing to give, and just that whole picture and painting that whole profile out, then all of a sudden you've got some recurring revenue on the books that you can start to do a lot of different things with. I mean, hiring, expanding, and everything. So I think, with Connor, he was kind of saying about expedited freight. And I think finding your niche, whether or not that's a big piece of his business, but finding your niche, whether it's CPGs, flatbed freight, metals, or whatever it is, that's going to play a huge role when you're able to mix in, what we've talked about already is that strength of your carrier base and coverage, or how many carriers you have at any given time to cover a lane. Similarly, some freight brokers in that CPG space operate just like that too. And I've seen it. I talked to so many customers that do the same thing. They have that fine-tuned carrier base that they're able to commit to with a certain amount of freight and certain amount of capacity, and they know that revenue is going to be on the books recurring every month. And whatever you can do to get that recurring revenue, like if it is taking losses and knowing that you're going to have that freight long term, that gives you that 10 grand, you know, you're going to start at least March with 10 grand. I think one of the worst things out of brokerage is, at least in my experience, was having a record into the month, and then boom, first of the month hits and it's back to goose egg zero, and I got to start over on March the 1st and April the 1st. So it can be very daunting on morale when you don't have something as simple as recurring revenue. So I would say something to take back from this recurring revenue piece is that, like, you know, look at your freight and find those opportunities that you might be able to expand in, like, you know, thinking about what carrier base you have, what the strength of your carrier network is, and going to your current customers and building there and expanding there rather than getting a new one. And it's usually much more cost effective to expand on your current customers than going and getting a new one.
Well, 100%. To your point too, there's been times where our teams are broken up by regions. So we have 4 different teams that are working 4 different regions, and those guys are building carrier bases in the region. So to your point, there's been times where we have a carrier that would be a great fit for a lane that we don't even have. We go to the shipper that we know has that lane that's in our network and figure out if they're experiencing any pain points on that lane. There's been times where we take it over and we already had the carrier to move it before we even took the lane over.
Yeah, that's that I would say that's the goal, right? Like, and that's the and what we'll talk about that, definitely the opportunity cost of automation. Having the time to actually have those conversations with carriers, that's missed a lot in today's world. I think just with all the tech being thrown out and everything moving so quickly, and e-commerce and 8 pandemics now, I don't even know how many COVID variations there are, but you know, a lot, it all comes down to that conversation. And I think, you know, talking back here to the recurring revenue piece, this is an area that you should be and you can be super, super bold with if you at least have that coverage and you're trying to find that recurring revenue and you're looking to grow, right? Like at the end of the day, we're talking about growth hacks here. So I just to share some experience, I danced with an idea one time where I recognized a pattern of freight in our TMS and emails, however many emails we had. But I noticed there was a cadence of a series of emails that would always come through from Houston to El Paso or West Texas. And I constantly had carriers asking me if we had freight for that area. What I ended up doing was locking in a rate that would hold with those carriers at least for 30 to 60 days. And I'd have a truck on standby for a West Texas freight because I knew it was going to come, just didn't know when. And just like most freights these days, less than 24 hours notice. So my carrier partners and I would kind of agree to let them know, like by a certain time, like either that day before, by like 8 o'clock that morning, if I didn't have a load, and they would still have time to find another one. So got kind of handshake agreement that, hey, it's okay, right? Because sometimes, and worst case, if I held on a little longer, I would have to pay a tow new, and I would eat the cost, even if it was like an hour after we agreed to it. But I would still pay it, even though I knew I couldn't charge the customer. It's just something that I wanted to do because I knew that, one, if anything else, it gives my carrier a little bit more revenue. They might have already had another load, so you know they knew that it might not work out. But in the times that it does work out for both of us, we didn't have to pay too much in truck order not used, or tow news, I guess. And our customers always knew that we had a truck, so that led to more volume and that guaranteed revenue. So the margin doubled than what I would have to pay the tow new because just the revenue growth. Kind of another example was at my time at XPO with Nestle Waters, and I've said this a couple of times if any of you have attended other webinars, but I had a few carriers that would accept like a daily rate with a local day cab, a lot lighter on the weight there, and that allowed them to shuttle those heavier loads, like your 48K water loads that no one else can do unless you've got the guy. And if you can get some sort of fixed agreeable cost with carriers, that will help you again win more freight with your shippers. Like Nestle called me at like midnight one time and was like, hey, I've got 40 of these a day. You guys have been taking 12 a day. Can you take them for the next year? So, well, yeah, I can send it over, right? Like I knew that I was going to get it covered because I already had the carrier base, and I was constantly pushing it in front of their face. Like, hey, I have more carriers that can take this. Do you have any capacity? Like, or any freight? Like, I've got the guys that can do it. Right. And so that's an area that, you can be bold in, and you should be, right. If it's a small loss in the front end, but long term, you're going to see the gains, and it's something you should look into.
Well, perfect example of that is 2021. We started with a new shipper where the first 2 months we did, I think, 7 to 10 loads a week. Each load we lost like $300 on for the first 60 days. And then it became like, hey, you guys are on time pickup 100% of the time. Like, our other carriers are in the 60s and 70s. Like, how are you able to do this? It's like, oh, well, we could actually do more than what we're doing right now, but this is what we would need to do more. Right. So you kind of have to be willing to eat it on the front end sometimes and play the long game.
Yeah, absolutely. And we all probably have these stories, water loads are cheap and heavy, but plenty of volume, especially in the summer. So kind of moving on to like building your carrier base. I think, sure, recurring revenue sounds great and all, but again, your carrier base at the end of the day plays a big role in that. And so with that in mind, this is kind of where a lot of companies fit, I'd say, with high call volume. So kind of want to ask you guys, how many calls on average does it take you or your team to book a load? We'll cue that poll up here. There we go. I've got to say I've had my fair share of 60 calls a load. No fun. Middle of nowhere.
I've had my fair share of making 150 calls in a day and not covering one load.
It's I mean, maybe I get one option, but like, think about the time that it took to do that, and like the process. Like, there's not much out there that is different, that gives you a different avenue or a channel to more carriers. It's like, not gonna bash any tools, but a lot of times it's still call heavy, right? And like, whatever you can do to reduce that list of carriers, or to bring your top options up closer to the top and reduce the amount of calls, the better, right? And again, like, this industry still, it's that phone call conversation heavy. So it's really about the time spent on that call too, right? Like, what are you doing on that call, procurement wise? I'm going to go ahead and end the poll. Looks like we got just about over half, but it looks like we kind of have a clear gravitational point, I would say, for lack of better words. I don't know, that might be the best word I could come up with, though. So I'm going to end the poll, share results, if you guys can see that. So it looks like most of you are kind of between around 10, less than 10, maybe 10 to 20. I'd probably say at 10 to 20, you've probably called everyone that's available. I would say, but by the time calls get through, like, each call is probably like 2, 3, 5 minutes. By that time, like, your load, you should start looking at other options at some point, right? Like, because if this is one person, I'm sure there's more people calling too. And just curious, like, on other things, like in the chat too, if you guys are Q&A or comments, I'd be curious to hear what your experiences on these calls are. Like, are you mostly getting options in this area, less than 10? Are these 10 calls coming from your TMS? Are they an external source? Just really curious how you guys are finding that right fit and that right match for your freight. Gonna kind of move on here. So I think, back to the procurement piece that I was talking about, and how your time is spent on each of those calls. I think it's easy to miss those conversations if each call isn't spent procuring or gathering information. So Connor, I kind of want to hear from you. Can you tell us maybe some goals or objectives you guys try to have when you're calling carriers, or why growing your carrier base with empathy is so important?
I'm actually really surprised by that poll result, because I was thinking it was going to be far higher. It really surprises me because, my brokers are required to make minimum 100 phone calls a day, no matter what the situation is. Like, for instance, today, they got all the freight covered at this point for the day, but they're still required to make 100 phone calls a day minimum, because when they're on the calls, it's not just about being on the phone, right? Like, anyone can be on the phone. just being on the phone is not nearly good enough. Anyone can dial, anyone can have a conversation, but it's about the quality of time that you spend on those calls, right? And the type
Yeah.
of questions you're asking and the type of information you're trying to source from the person you're talking to. When our brokers are cold calling carriers, it's not only to cover that load that they're working on, right? Like all of our brokers use this CRM that we've kind of developed for carriers and relationships with carriers. So when they're calling on that load, they're asking carriers more questions than, hey, do you have a truck available for Atlanta to Florida today or whatever?
Yeah.
Those guys are asking what's the best contact number for their dispatch department, what's the best email address to send load lists to, how many dry vans do they have, how many reefers, how many flatbeds, do they have hazmat certification, do they run on the weekends, what areas in the country do they like to run, southeast, midwest, west, northeast, are they open to dropping trailers at shippers or receivers if they had consistent business? And then when you compile all that information and all that data into whatever you're going to use to store it, then when opportunities come about, you have everything there already. And it's not you going out and trying to cold call carriers all day to complete a project. You've already
Yeah.
done that in your spare time when you've already covered all the freight, right? Like most people's goal every day is just to cover the freight on the board, right? That's a terrible goal to have. You'll never get ahead doing that. You'll always be spinning on the hamster wheel every single day. After you cover the freight from the day, your next goal should be to source as much information as you possibly can from the carriers that are in your network and talking to those guys every single day. I mean, a lot of brokers really, they talk to carriers and they think of carriers as like, I don't know, it almost seems like they think that they don't need these guys, you know?
Yeah.
And when they're talking to them, it's like they're talking to them like the carriers owe us something, you know, and it doesn't work that way, man. Like you got to talk to these guys with respect. Talk to them like you actually value the service that they're providing for you. You know, you can make a big difference in the way that you do business if you just change the way that you deal with carriers.
Yeah. You know, back to like kind of earlier in the discussion, bad morals or bad habits. Like I think sometimes it's kind of reciprocal of like what some reps see from some carriers. Like the amount of carriers that a broker reaches is probably more than like the number of brokers a carrier is calling it. And I think like when a broker reaches a carrier that could be bad acting, if you will, they may want to reciprocate like the brevity in that brief conversation. And maybe that's what carries through. And sometimes it can, right? Like carries through your day where you start the day with these short, brief, do you have a truck? No, okay, bye conversations. Like your day is going to mimic
It's
a lot.
habitual.
Yeah. And it's hard to reflect back and be like, man, I should have like said something different on that call. Like, is it, you never know, like my time, you know, booking freight, I'd always say drive safe. And I'd hate it when I would forget to say that because it meant so much to me that like knowing that guy on the other end of the phone, like, I don't know what he could be going through. Like, who knows? Like something could have happened last night in his family. And like my
100%.
rude comment could have like triggered something. And
Well,
I
and
always want to kind of expand positivity or
what's crazy about that too is like I think I mentioned earlier on the call that I
I'm gonna
used
cry
to be like
about
the
it. Sorry,
opposite
you
of
can't
that.
see my tears, but
I used to be the opposite of that, man. Like I was the biggest culprit in not treating carriers with respect, and it was something that I really learned the hard way, right? And it's because it's common out there, like you see it all the time. And what actually changed for us is we were working in a different office than the one that we work in now. And there was a security guard in the front of the building. And we always kind of thought that he could be a good employee and so on and so forth. So we gave him a job opportunity. Literally the nicest guy I've ever met in my entire life. The most gentle, kind person. And he starts, and one day I'm standing next to the desk that he's working in, talking to my driver services manager. And before he hangs up with the driver, he tells the guy to have a nice day and drive safe. And at that moment, I was like, what did you just say? And he was like, oh, you know, I told him to drive safe. And I'm like, what made you say that? And he was like, well, you know, I mean, I don't want anything bad to happen to these guys. Like, I hope they have a good day. And I'm like, dude, why have I never thought of this before? And it literally, that day, I changed my mind on everything that I thought about dealing with carriers. And I really started to look at the carriers that we work with like our partners.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think like having that in your culture, it just, spreads like wildfire. One person hears it, who knows, like who else could hear it? And then the
I've
next
even
guy.
literally gone, I've literally now gone as far as firing an employee on the spot for cursing a carrier out on the phone. Like, and it's funny because like if you took a poll amongst employees here, like most of them would say that I was the worst culprit ever of that 5 years ago.
Yeah. I think, this kind of line here, carriers are your customers too, kind of reflecting your image, right? And like the same thing, like they talk. They talk at the docks, right? They're going to talk to each other. And they could be offering good service, and your customers are going to hear that at the shipper. Or if you treat them poorly, that same experience is going to be reflected at the shipper or consignee, and the whole thing. So it could go south very quickly. So no,
I mean,
I
dude, it's literally the golden rule. Like, think about how
yeah,
would you feel if you're in the driver's seat of the truck? Literally, just think about that whenever whenever you're working every day and whenever you're making your transactions. Think about that guy and how he would feel in that seat, and how you would feel if you were in that seat.
yeah, absolutely. I can't even drive more than like 2 hours. So I
Me
get it.
neither. I literally bought a Tesla because I wanted autopilot. I can't do it.
Let's we're ending up here to the hour, so we're going to kind of talk briefly about this next one. I'm going to go ahead and run this last poll here. A little bit about automation. I've heard a few things, from a software point. Some people love it, and they feel like that's something they want to learn more about. They're like, I love having this technology. It works so great. What else is going to be out there? What else can it do? There's some people that feel like it's a necessity, like necessity meaning like my shippers require it, right? Like they require me to have tracking, so I have to have it. So there's that aspect too. Some people are a little hesitant to automate. I think, we'll talk a little bit here towards the end about how simple it can be. And then there's, not really knowing too much about it. I think it's a thing just as new companies come into the space and as marketing expands and companies learn to kind of use brand awareness and things like that and run webinars and stuff like that, then more brand awareness will start to uptick, and you'll start to hear more about technologies that fit. Gonna go ahead and end this poll, give it about 1 second, and there we go. So I'm gonna share the results. Most of you feel like it's a necessity, which is interesting. Kind of leads me back into actually this last topic here, about my time at C.H. Robinson. It was short-lived, but while I was there, we were just trying to track carriers through their phones, right? Like getting them to download an app, getting them to like accept tracking. Like that stuff was so hard, like to get them to actually do that. Where fast forward 10 years, a pandemic and 12,000 hurricanes, like now it's a necessity, right? It's required, it's a requirement. And like carriers and drivers have adopted that. And just as part of technology progresses, that's what's going to happen, right? But still, kind of what I say earlier is that this industry still favors that phone call and conversation over anything. So like it's interesting to see where the book it now tools go, and what happens and what helps execute that load. Connor, any comments here on this last poll?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think automation is a necessity, mostly because shippers require it now on a lot of things. But I want to go back to what I said earlier, and I want everybody to understand, like, if you don't have a good foundation of the business right now, and you're looking to scale through technology, you're going the wrong direction, right? You have to have a good foundation. And I see this all the time, right? Because most people, they want to put up the curtains in the house, right? Before they pour the concrete. The concrete goes first, then comes everything else. Build the foundation, build the relationships, then scale through technology. It's definitely a necessity, but I think far too many companies are focused on that instead of the human emotion part and the relationship part.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think like when it comes to scaling your business, one of those important things is committing to the mission. You want the right leadership in place, the focus it's going to take to weed out kind of what's not priority, and the systems, processes, and automation, again, to support your business, your operations, and then kind of absolutely the people and the team needed to adapt to that change and work towards that common goal. Going to kind of boogie
Well,
on.
real quick, I want to say
Yeah.
one thing. So for instance, this is a perfect example about pouring the concrete first and then automation later, right? So
Yeah.
we have a great relationship with a shipper that we work with on the West Coast. That shipper was having problems with, it's kind of what I said earlier, right? They were having problems with a lane that one of their brokers or carriers was running. And they reached out to us, hey, what kind of solutions can you provide to take this lane over, right? So we actually had one of our carrier sales reps go through Cargo Chief and find a carrier to run those 1,500 loads a year. One carrier running them all, dropping equipment. And we took over that lane from the carrier that was failing on it. But the only reason we had that opportunity was because we built the foundation first, and then we used the technology to source that capacity.
Yeah, it's the finding the right, I guess, person to have that conversation isn't just like they're not just walking on the streets, right? Like you have to really build and instill that in your culture and training and everything else that we've talked about, right? It helped that individual have that conversation with the right carrier and the technology in place to add that layer of consistency. I think I kind of look at automation from the lens of what's the opportunity cost. A little bit about what I was talking about earlier. Automation can be simple. It doesn't have to be so complicated to where it scares you, I guess, or that you're not really aware of it. It can be as simple as queuing up a list of carriers that fit certain criteria. Kind of getting rid of the tedious Excel sheets or your sticky notes that never make it anywhere except the trash. It can be something simple as like an import-export function for those like lengthy RFPs. I think Connor, you mentioned some RFPs. So rather than quoting lane by lane, import export in 10 minutes saves you 3 hours, right? And I think like reporting, even with automation, like most TMSs these days, the reporting leaves you on a management call for an hour, and you can't really empower your team to take the next step. So to me, reports and automation would be more useful if you could find an actionable way to use that report that doesn't require that hourly call. Well, I think when you go a step further and you think about that pre-booking process, I'd say time and time again in my past, I'd call a carrier at 3:00, where they would tell me if I just called them 2 hours ago, they would have had a truck for me. And I think these days there's a lot of digital freight matching tools out there, but that option pool and that carrier engagement side before that load actually gets booked is usually where that true work is, and it's often missed. So kind of, again, that phone call and conversation favoring anything. And imagine if that automation that you had helped ease just some of that pressure of multi-lane bids, carrier expansion, or pre-booking. What impact does that have on your business? Or even if a quarter of your freight, 20% of your freight had automated options and carrier engagement, what does that mean to your business, right? Like what does your team now have the time to do? They could now, spend time procuring, calling, and having real conversations with real carriers and adding value where that human intervention is needed, especially when it comes to those big challenges like finding a carrier for 1,000 loads, right? Any sort of bid like that. Technology is not really going to do that for you. That's the real conversations that have to happen. And that's the opportunity cost, right? Like today, missing out on just a few layers of automation could mean missing the mark on those conversations and what you're not able to do. So again, I think today there's some tech that may hinder or hold back some companies, like as far as like negotiation and making a decision and that whole decision process with max buys. So making sure like your tech doesn't hinder you is important too. Typically aligns with your max buys, I would say. So maybe take a look at those and making sure that your team has the power to make quick decisions on the fly as they're negotiating freight with their carriers. And I think, just to kind of wrap this up here, the most important key, I would say, of scaling is people. Kind of like what you were saying, Connor. Here at Cargo Chief, we don't look for just the next employee. We look for like really the next partner, or someone who's going to be the right fit for what we're looking for, and not just do a job, and want to grow the business with us. And I think as a leader, as you do think of ways to scale your business and to build to that top-notch brokerage, you should probably become friends with self-reflection and humility, and think about employee turnover just as if it was an early customer, and how important it was to not lose them, and how painful it was, right? And so reflecting on what happened, what went wrong, how you can improve as a business, and what we can do differently next time, right? And just making sure that doesn't happen again. So kind of with that, Connor, if you'd like to conclude on anything here, I'm going to kind of go to a recap slide, as we're well over the time, and I appreciate everybody that's stuck around. But just some closing remarks, comments, Connor, anything on your end?
I feel like I talked a lot. We're over the time. I mean, I think it would be good for us to kind of do Q&A now, since we already went over the time.
Yeah, absolutely, sure. So just to kind of leave everyone here again, you'll have a link to the deck, and then our ultimate checklist. I would say some of the questions that Connor was mentioning earlier when they talk to carriers, we'll be sending that out to you so you can have that in your hands and share that with the team. So on to Q&A. Let's answer these briefly if there's anyone still around. Let me try to find some questions here. Nerfad, not sure if you're still around. His question was, how do we get, I'd say, Mexican carriers interested, or USA carriers interested in running Mexico-related freight? Do you have any insight into cross-border?
So for us, it's going to be a little bit different because we are an agent and we have a parent company that has other agents. So we have so many resources to pull from when it comes to that. We run a ton of cross-border freight into Mexico, but we do that with one of our agent partners who only runs cross-border stuff. And the way we kind of met that person was just basically reaching out to the agent network, talking to people, figuring out if we could find somebody that was a good fit for that. So I wouldn't say that I have the most experience with that, because I feel like we kind of had an easier route there with being an agent. So I'm not sure if I could really talk on that further.
Yeah, the cross-border is a little difficult. Nerfad, if you'd like, probably point in the right direction, or have another call after this and maybe talk to you a little bit about that. I had some dabbling into that. I had no business doing it probably, but hey, I tried. So another question here, I think, kind of relied along, I guess, the stage of a company. It's hard to find quality carriers, rather than just a large network of carriers. What would you say, or any recommendations on finding quality carriers over than just a ton of carriers?
So we try to stay away from using carriers with more than 50 trucks. And the reason why is you have so many big, huge mega carriers out there that have all these trucks, all this equipment, and they have no problem dropping your load in the yard and forgetting about it for 2 days while your customer breathes down your throat and tries to figure out where the freight is, right? Those mega carriers, they'll do it day in and day out, because if they lose business from you, they don't care because everybody else is giving them business, right? So when we're doing procurement and we're looking to find good relationships with carriers, we're literally looking for carriers that have 50 trucks or less. And most of the guys that we work with that run kind of the regular dedicated stuff that I was talking about earlier have like 10 trucks or less. And those are the best ones to work with.
Yeah. This question kind of fits right into that wheelhouse. What's the best way, or what would you recommend to like cataloging or storing those carrier details and lanes, and just kind of that carrier profile?
So something that I actually was thinking about during the call, and I can actually send this over to you, Chris, if you want to send it out to all the people that attended the webinar. I actually have an Excel sheet that I used to use before we kind of had technology like we have now. And I can send that over. It's literally how I used to track my relationships with carriers. It's filtered out so you can do it by state and things like that. And it's really, it's an easy tool to use. it keeps everything in one place. And I can send that over to you after this, no problem.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure a lot of people would like to see that. I had my own kind of Excel carrier profile portfolio, if you will, just learning the trick of the trade from C.H. Robinson. So I kind of carried that with me. One last question here. I think it's from Amy, and we'll wrap it up. I think this is for you, Connor, actually. Do you have a person or department that handles that carrier procurement side?
So I mean, we do. It's our carrier sales reps. I think I mentioned earlier that our carrier sales reps are broken up into regions. So the Southwest, we don't have a region for the Southwest. They're broken up into Southeast, Northeast, Midwest, and West Coast. And each of those regions has a team lead as well. Those team leads work with their reps to do procurement every single day. So like I said, when they're making those phone calls to carriers, they're not just trying to cover the load that they're assigned to that day. They're doing procurement at the same time. They're sourcing the information, they're plugging it into the technology so they can come back to it whenever they need to. It's literally a daily thing that you do. It's not something where you go out and you do procurement for 3 weeks and then you're done forever, right? You do it daily.
Yeah, I like to introduce the word procurement to some people. Sometimes it's like when you think about construction, or like if you're building something new, like you're procuring materials, right? You're procuring the costs for jobs, like in everything else, timelines, where it's going to be. You're gathering all this information, probably from multiple sources, different bids from different contractors, and that's kind of what it is for, you know, in the brokerage side too, right? Like you're trying to find the right fit, the right cost, the right times, the right truck recovery, if they have more than one truck or not, where their yards are, just all this information in it, and trying to find the right fit for your job that you've got, right? Or your project or opportunity or whatever it is. So I think if you think about it like that, it might be easier to be able to implement, I think, and instill it in your culture and team. So that's going to be it, everybody. Thank you so much for sticking with us and extending the time. We enjoyed it. And again, here at the end, we'll send out the deck. You'll have that ultimate checklist for kind of covering everything that we talked about today. And then here at the end, as you exit, there's probably going to be a brief survey. So if you can fill that out and let us know what else you'd like to hear in the future. So with that, thanks everybody, and we'll talk soon.